I never thought I'd see the day when the faces I once kissed goodnight would look at me and see nothing but dollar signs. For 78 years, I'd worked, saved, and built a life that I thought was full of love. My wife Margaret and I had raised 3 children, Daniel, Claire, and Michael, each one different in spirit, but all, I believed, bound by the same thread of family that had always kept us close. Or so I thought. It began subtly. The weekly visits became monthly. Then the calls trickled down to birthdays and holidays. "Dad, I'm busy with work. You know how hard it is raising kids these days." Excuses. Reasonable at first. I told myself they were living their lives. That's what parents do, right? We step aside so our children can walk their own paths. But it wasn't until after Margaret passed that I saw the truth unravel. When she was gone, the house became unbearably silent. Her laughter had been the last heartbeat of the home. I thought the kids would draw closer then, that grief might reunite us. Instead, they began circling like vultures disguised as helpers. Daniel was the first to suggest selling the house. "It's too big for you, Dad," he said gently. "You could move into something smaller, maybe a retirement community." I could see the calculation in his eyes. Not concern, anticipation. Claire, ever the peacemaker, tried to sound sincere. "It's what Mom would have wanted," she said. But Margaret would never have wanted me uprooted from the home where we'd built our life. Still, I went along with the conversations for a while. I wanted to believe they cared. I wanted to believe their concern was genuine. But everything shifted the day I overheard Daniel whispering in the kitchen after dinner. "Once the house sells, we can finally pay off that mortgage," he told Claire. "Dad's got savings too. We'll be set." That night, I sat in my armchair, staring at the framed photos on the mantel. Family vacations, graduations, Christmas mornings. Every smile now looked different, hollow. I had always been proud of how hard I'd worked to give them comfort. But comfort, I realized, can rot into entitlement. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a quiet man named Harris who'd been handling my finances for decades. "Mr. Whitaker," he said after hearing my voice. "Is everything all right?" "Not quite," I told him. "I think it's time we discuss the will." There was a pause on the line. "Do you wish to make amendments?" "Oh, I plan to do a lot more than that," I said. Over the next few weeks, I played the part of the frail old man. I let them believe I was slipping, that my memory was fading. Daniel began stopping by more often, too often. He'd bring takeout, pretending to check on me, but his eyes always scanned the documents on my desk. Claire would sigh heavily about her bills, about how hard life had become. Even Michael, my youngest, who'd once sworn he wanted nothing from me, started hinting that maybe it's time to organize your affairs. They thought I didn't notice, but there's a clarity that comes with age, like the fog lifting after a long storm. You see people for who they really are. So I decided to teach them what it means to mistake kindness for weakness. One afternoon, I invited them all over for dinner. I cooked Margaret's favorite meal, pot roast, with the smell of rosemary and garlic filling the air. Nostalgia is a powerful thing. It softens people's defenses. As they sat around the old oak table, laughter came easily. For a moment, it almost felt real again. Then Daniel raised his glass. "To Dad," he said, smiling, "for everything you've done for us." I smiled back, pretending to swallow the sentiment like a sweet lie. After dessert, I cleared my throat. "Kids," I said, "I've been thinking about the future. I've decided to make some changes. I want to make sure everyone's taken care of properly." They exchanged quick, eager glances, each trying not to look too interested. "That's great, Dad," Claire said, her voice sugary. "It's wise to plan ahead." I nodded. "Harris will be coming by tomorrow to finalize everything. I just wanted you to know how proud I am of all of you." Daniel leaned forward. "You mean you're changing the will?" "I am," I said calmly. "To reflect what matters most to me." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it hum like the steady rhythm of time itself. Margaret's picture rested on the nightstand beside me. "They forgot what family means, love," I whispered. "But they are about to remember." When Harris arrived the next day, he brought a thick folder of documents. Together we crafted a plan, not just a new will, but a lesson in humility, written in legal ink. Half the estate, I instructed, would go to a local orphanage Margaret used to volunteer at. The rest would be distributed among people who had shown me genuine kindness: my nurse, the gardener, even the young clerk at the grocery store who always carried my bags without being asked. And to my children, I left them something far more valuable than money: a letter. When it was all signed and sealed, Harris looked at me with quiet approval. "You're certain about this?" he asked. "Absolutely," I said. "Sometimes love has to come with a little pain to be remembered." That evening, Daniel called again. "Hey, Dad, just wanted to check in," he said. I smiled into the phone. "Don't worry, son. Everything's being taken care of." He didn't realize how true that was. By the end of the week, everything was ready. And I waited, patiently, quietly, because I knew the day of revelation would come sooner than they expected. A month later, I found myself sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the trees, its golden light glinting off the wind chimes Margaret had hung years ago. The world around me was calm, but inside I was waiting for the storm that was sure to come once my children discovered what I'd done. I didn't have to wait long. It was Daniel, of course, who struck first. He showed up unannounced one Saturday afternoon, his car tires crunching over the gravel driveway like an omen. "Dad," he called out as he climbed the steps, "we need to talk." His tone was tight, controlled, but brimming with that mix of entitlement and worry I knew too well. "Of course, son," I said, motioning to the chair beside me. "Have a seat." He sat down, but didn't look at the sunset. His eyes darted to the folder resting on the little table beside me, the one Harris had dropped off earlier that day. "Claire said you've been making changes," he began carefully. "To your finances." I nodded. "That's right. A man's got to put things in order, you know. Can't take any of it with me." He forced a laugh. Sure. It's just, well, I think we should all be on the same page. Make sure things go smoothly when the time comes." Ah, there it was. When the time comes. He couldn't even say, "when you're gone." "Don't you worry about that," I said, keeping my tone light. "Everything's arranged. I even left a few surprises for you kids." That got his attention. "Surprises?" I smiled faintly. "You'll see soon enough." He frowned, sensing something he couldn't quite name. Then, almost as if he were searching for reassurance, he patted my arm. We just want what's best for you, Dad." I met his gaze steadily. "I know exactly what you want, Daniel." He pulled his hand back, as though my words had burned him. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the whispers, the planning, the way they'd started measuring my life in terms of inheritance, and any softness in me hardened again. After he left, I sat there alone, listening to the evening breeze. Margaret's wind chimes sang gently, like laughter from another life. I could almost hear her voice. "They'll understand one day, Henry." The next week, Claire called. Unlike Daniel, she approached with tears instead of tactics. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked. "You've been distant lately. I feel like we're losing you." Her tone might have fooled anyone else, but I knew better. Claire's guilt always wore perfume. It lingered, sweet and artificial. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said softly. "Just been thinking about what really matters." "That's good," she replied. Daniel mentioned something about your will. You're not doing anything drastic, are you?" "Drastic?" I echoed, pretending to think it over. "I don't think so. Just setting things right, that's all." There was a pause, then a shaky laugh. "You've always been so thoughtful, Dad." "Yes," I said, "and I still am." When she hung up, I could almost hear her rushing to call Daniel, their voices buzzing through the grapevine of greed that bound them tighter than family ever had. Over the following days, the calls multiplied. They stopped pretending to care and started demanding answers. "You're being manipulated," Daniel accused. "You're not thinking straight," said Claire. Even Michael, who'd kept silent the longest, sent an email that read, "Dad, just remember who's always been there for you." Who's always been there for me? The irony stung. None of them had been there. Not when Margaret was sick. Not when I sat alone on her side of the bed listening to her old voice messages just to hear her laugh again. I decided it was time to finish what I started. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. My birthday was approaching 79 years on this earth. I knew they'd come, not out of love but obligation, and maybe curiosity about how much longer I'd last. So I planned one final gathering. I spent the morning cooking Margaret's recipes. The scent of baked bread and roasted vegetables filled the house, blending with old memories. I set the table just as she used to. 3 candles, her crystal dish in the center, and linen napkins folded neatly beside every plate. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to see my 3 children standing there, smiling too wide. They brought gifts, flowers, and a cake that probably cost less than their excuses over the years. "Happy birthday, Dad," Claire said, hugging me. I hugged her back gently. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm glad you could all make it." Dinner was polite, too polite. Conversation drifted between small talk and subtle probing. They were waiting for me to bring it up, so I did. "I made some important decisions recently," I said, wiping my mouth with my napkin. "And since we're all here, I think it's time I shared them." 3 pairs of eyes locked on me. "You know, your mother used to say that money reveals more about people than hardship ever could," I began. "When times are tough, people fight together. But when money's involved..." I let the words hang in the air. Daniel cleared his throat. "Dad, if this is about the will..." "It is," I interrupted calmly. "It's finalized. Harris has the papers." Claire's smile faltered. "Finalized? Already?" "Yes. Everything's in writing. I wanted to make sure the right people were rewarded for the love and care they've shown me." There was a silence sharp enough to slice through the air. Daniel leaned forward. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means," I said, looking at each of them, "that I've left my estate to those who showed me what family really means." Michael frowned. "What are you talking about, Dad?" "You'll find out soon," I replied, standing up. "Dinner's over. Thank you for coming." They stared at me as I walked away from the table. For once, I didn't feel like the frail old man they saw. I felt strong, unshakable. That night, as they left, I saw the confusion on their faces turning to panic. They didn't know what I'd done yet, but their fear was delicious in its honesty. For the first time in years, they were showing real emotion. And when Harris delivered the letters to them a week later, that fear turned into the lesson they'd never forget. Daniel called first. His voice was trembling, but he tried to sound composed. "Dad, I just received a letter from your lawyer. Is this some kind of mistake?" I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of his question and the quiet satisfaction that came with it. "No mistake, Daniel. I reviewed every word myself." "You left the house to Maria?" His voice cracked on her name. "Yes," I said simply. "She's been more family to me than any of you for years." For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the explosion I'd expected. "She's just the housekeeper. You've known her for what, 5 years? She's not blood." I sighed. "Blood doesn't make family, Daniel. Actions do." He went quiet again, but I could hear his anger simmering through the phone. "This is insane," he muttered. "You're letting her manipulate you. You think she cares about you? She's after the same thing everyone else is, your money." "Funny," I said, my tone calm. "She's the only one who's never asked me for a dime." He didn't respond. I could almost picture him clenching his fists the same way he did as a teenager when he didn't get his way. "Dad, please," he said finally, his voice softer. "We're your children. Everything you have, it's part of our family's legacy. You can't just give it away." "Legacy?" I repeated with a quiet laugh. "You all sold your share of that legacy when you stopped showing up." I hung up before he could respond. The next morning, Claire arrived unannounced. She was still elegant, polished. Her perfume entered the room before she did. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, eyes glistening with practiced tears. "Dad, what are you doing?" she whispered. "Daniel's furious, and Michael's heartbroken. We don't understand why you're doing this." I studied her for a long moment. "Do you remember the last time you came to visit, Claire?" She blinked, uncertain. "Of course. It wasn't that long ago." "It was 3 years ago," I said. "You brought a bottle of wine and spent half the evening taking business calls on the porch." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. "You didn't even notice your mother's photograph had fallen off the mantel," I continued. "Do you know who picked it up, cleaned the glass, and set it back?" She looked down. "Maria," she said softly. "That's right," I replied. "She did it because she cared, not because she had to, not because it benefited her, just because she loved your mother's memory." Claire wiped a tear from her cheek. For the first time, it didn't look rehearsed. "I didn't realize how distant we'd become," she murmured. "You didn't want to realize," I corrected gently. "It was easier not to." She nodded slowly, eyes darting around the room as if she could find forgiveness hidden somewhere between the walls. "So that's it then?" she asked. "You're leaving everything to her?" "Not everything," I said. "I left something for each of you, too." Her eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. "You did?" "Yes," I said, standing and walking to the cabinet. I opened a drawer and pulled out a small sealed envelope. I handed it to her. "What is it?" she asked, tearing it open. Inside was a photograph, an old one of me, Margaret, and the three of them as children, sitting on the porch of our first home. There was also a note in my handwriting. She unfolded it slowly, and I watched as her eyes scanned the words. "This is what you had before you wanted anything more." She looked up at me, trembling. "Dad, this isn't fair." "No," I said quietly. "It's not. But life rarely is." She stood there for a moment, the picture shaking in her hands. Then she whispered, "You really hate us that much?" That cut deeper than I expected. I stood, walking to the window, watching the morning light spill over the yard. "I could never hate you," I said, "but I won't reward neglect. You all forgot who you were raised to be. I'm just reminding you." 3 weeks later, I got another call, this time from Michael. Unlike the others, he didn't shout or accuse. He just said quietly, "Dad, can I come see you?" There was something in his voice, sincerity, maybe even shame. I told him yes. When he arrived, he didn't come empty-handed. He brought an old toolbox, mine, the one I'd given him when he was 16. It was rusty now, but the sight of it stirred something deep in my chest. "I fixed the latch," he said, setting it on the table. "Thought you might want it back." I smiled. "You always were good with your hands." He shrugged, sitting across from me. "I wasn't good at much else, though, was I?" I didn't answer right away. "You were good at being my son. You just forgot how." He nodded, staring down at the table. "I did forget. I'm sorry." It was quiet for a long time after that. And for the first time in years, it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt real. Before he left, he looked at me and said, "Dad, I don't care about the money. I just don't want to lose you." That night, I sat on the porch again, thinking about all three of them. Maybe this plan had done more than shock them. It had made them feel. And perhaps that was worth more than any inheritance could ever be. But deep down, I knew the lesson wasn't over yet. The final chapter was still waiting to be written. Weeks turned into months, and the tension between my children and me began to settle into a strange quiet. No more angry phone calls. No more pleading messages. It was as if they'd decided to wait me out, to see whether I'd change my mind or whether time itself would undo what I'd done. But I didn't change it. I stood by every word of that will. Maria noticed I'd grown quieter. "You're thinking too much again," she'd say, setting down a cup of tea beside me. "Thinking is all an old man can do, Maria," I'd reply with a soft smile. But she was right. My mind was restless. I wondered what my children were saying to one another behind closed doors. Were they angry? Hurt? Or were they already planning how to fight my decision once I was gone? I didn't have to wonder for long. One rainy afternoon, my lawyer, Mr. Callahan, paid me a visit. He was a thin man with silver hair and a sharp nose, always polite but never sentimental. "Henry," he began, taking off his glasses and polishing them, "your son Daniel reached out to me. He's requested a meeting about contesting the will." I let out a slow sigh. "I expected as much. He claims," Callahan continued, "that you were coerced, that perhaps Maria influenced your decision in your vulnerable state." The words cut deep, not because of what Daniel said, but because of how predictably he said it. "Vulnerable state," I repeated. "That's what they call growing old now?" Callahan looked at me sympathetically. "Do you want to proceed with legal action against them if they push further?" I shook my head. "No, I don't want a courtroom battle. I want them to learn something from this, not hate me more." He nodded, closing his briefcase. "You're a better man than most, Henry. Most would want revenge. Revenge fades," I said quietly. "But lessons last." That night, I called Maria into the study. The fire flickered softly in the hearth, throwing light across her worried face. "Maria," I said, "if things get ugly after I'm gone, I want you to promise me one thing. Don't fight them." She frowned. "But Mr. Henry, this is your home, your life's work. They shouldn't be able to take it." "I know," I said gently, "but sometimes letting go teaches more than holding on. If they take it, let them. They'll learn soon enough that the real inheritance isn't in these walls." She looked down, tears glistening in her eyes. "You talk as if you're leaving soon." I smiled faintly. "We all leave soon, Maria. It's just a matter of when." A month later, I fell ill. It wasn't sudden. It was the slow, creeping kind of sickness that comes with time. The doctors called it heart failure, but I knew it was something else. It was the weight of years spent watching love fade and loyalty tested. My children began visiting again, one by one. Daniel came first, his expression full of forced warmth. He brought flowers, spoke in gentle tones, and avoided the topic of the will entirely. I could tell he was trying to play the long game, waiting for an opportunity to sway me. "How are you feeling, Dad?" he asked, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "Tired," I admitted. "But content." He smiled faintly. "That's good. You've always been a fighter." "Fighting gets old," I murmured. "Sometimes peace feels better." He nodded, his eyes darting around the room. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said before, about family. You were right. We did lose touch, but maybe it's not too late to fix that." I turned to him, studying his face. There was something genuine there, buried under layers of pride, but still real. "I'd like that," I said softly. When he left, I felt lighter. Maybe, just maybe, something had shifted. A few days later, Claire visited. She didn't say much at first, just sat beside me, holding my hand. The silence between us felt like an old wound finally being dressed. "I brought the photo you gave me," she said, pulling it from her purse. "The one of all of us back when we were still a family. I had it framed. It's on my desk now." That made me smile. "Good. It belongs somewhere. It'll be seen." "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "For all of it. I let the world get in the way. I let money, work, pride, everything come before you." I squeezed her hand gently.
"You're human, Claire. The mistake wasn't leaving. It was forgetting to come back."
She nodded, sobbing softly. And for the first time in years, I saw my daughter again. Not the businesswoman, not the socialite, but the little girl who used to sit on my shoulders and point at the stars. Michael came last. He didn't bring anything this time, not even the toolbox. He just came to sit and talk. We spoke for hours about old fishing trips, about Margaret, about everything we'd lost and found again. Before he left, he said quietly, "You know, Dad, I think you were right to do what you did." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, that's a first." He smiled. "It woke us up. All these years, we were chasing things that never mattered. It took losing what we thought was ours to realize what we'd already lost." Those words stayed with me long after he'd gone. Maybe, after all the pain and the silence, they were beginning to understand. But fate, as always, has its own timing. 2 weeks later, on a bright spring morning, I woke up feeling different. My chest was heavy, my breath shallow. Maria found me sitting in my chair, staring out the window at the garden I'd planted with Margaret decades ago. "Mr. Henry," she said, rushing over. "Do you need your medicine?" I smiled weakly. "No, Maria. I think I'm just tired." She grabbed my hand, tears forming instantly. "Don't say that. You'll be fine. You always are." But I knew. I could feel it. My time had come. "Promise me one last thing," I said, my voice faint. "Anything," she whispered. "When I'm gone, don't hold anger in your heart for them. Let them find peace. They'll come to you one day, not for money, but for forgiveness. Give it freely." She nodded through tears, clutching my hand tightly. I closed my eyes and thought of my children, not as they were now, but as they were then, running through the yard, laughing, calling my name. Margaret standing on the porch, smiling. The house full of life. And with that picture in my mind, I took my final breath. The world faded quietly around me, like the last note of a song. The news of my passing spread quickly. Within hours, my children were at the house, standing in the same room they had once filled with laughter, and later with tension. The silence was thick as Maria guided them toward the study where my lawyer, Mr. Callahan, waited with the sealed envelope I had left behind. My portrait hung on the wall behind him, not as a reminder of authority, but of love. I had asked Maria to place it there, so they'd see my face when the truth was revealed. Mr. Callahan adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat. "Your father left a letter to be read aloud after his passing. He requested that you all hear it together. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. A letter? I thought this was about the will. Callahan nodded. It is, but the letter is part of it. He unfolded the paper, the sound of it echoing through the quiet room. My dear children, he began reading my words. If you're hearing this, it means I've gone ahead. Don't be sad. I've lived a long, full life. One that gave me more love and laughter than most could dream of. But I won't pretend my final years were easy. Watching our family drift apart hurt more than any illness ever could. Claire's eyes welled up instantly. Michael looked away. Daniel's jaw tightened. When your mother passed, the letter continued, I lost not just my wife, but the bridge that kept us together. I tried to fill that space, but I wasn't strong enough to carry the weight alone. So instead of fighting for connection, I let silence grow between us. For that, I'm sorry. A pause filled the room, thick and heavy. But there's something you must understand. This house, this land, the savings, they were never meant to divide you. They were meant to remind you of what we built together. I wanted you to see that family is worth more than inheritance, that love is a greater currency than gold. Callahan's voice softened as he read on. You thought I left everything to Maria, but that was never the whole story. Maria will hold the estate in trust, not for herself, but for you. For the day you can all come together, not as individuals claiming your share, but as a family willing to rebuild what was lost. Daniel's head snapped up. What? Callahan nodded slightly. Your father's instructions are clear. None of you will inherit until you demonstrate unity. All decisions must be made together, unanimously. The three siblings looked at one another, confusion mixing with guilt. And one more thing, the letter continued. I've asked Maria to host a dinner here every year on my birthday. Whether you come or not is your choice. But know this, the first time you all share a meal here again as a family, that's when the house will truly belong to you. A stunned silence followed. Michael was the first to speak. So he's giving us a second chance? Maria wiped her eyes, nodding. That's exactly what he wanted. Daniel let out a shaky breath. After everything we said to him, everything we did, Claire touched his arm gently. He forgave us before we even asked. For a long time, no one moved. Then, quietly, Michael said, we should honor him, not for the inheritance, for him. They stayed that evening, helping Maria prepare dinner, the first time they had eaten together in years. The table was simple, the food humble, but something in the air felt lighter. The old house, once weighed down by silence, now hummed softly with laughter and conversation. As they ate, memories began to surface. Stories of childhood, of fishing trips, of Margaret's garden, of nights when the power went out and I'd tell them ghost stories by candlelight. At one point, Daniel raised his glass. To Dad, he said, for teaching us the hard way what family really means. To Dad, they echoed, clinking their glasses together. Maria watched them with tears in her eyes. Later that night, when everyone had left, she stepped out into the garden where I used to sit. The stars shimmered faintly above her. I think you did it, Mr. Henry, she whispered. You brought them home. The years passed, and my children kept their promise. The annual dinners became tradition. Each year, more laughter returned to the walls that once held so much pain. Daniel brought his teenage daughter one year, my granddaughter, whom I never met in life. She walked through the house in awe, asking about the grandpa who taught everyone a lesson. And in time, she too learned what that lesson truly was. Because family isn't about who shows up when times are good. It's about who stays when the light fades, who holds your hand when you have nothing left to give. One spring evening, decades later, Daniel stood in that same garden, now older, his hair silver like mine once was. Maria had long since retired, but the house remained a living memory, not a monument of wealth, but of reconciliation. He knelt down beside the small stone marker beneath the oak tree, my resting place. You were right, Dad, he said softly. You always were. We lost everything chasing what didn't matter. But we found each other again because of you. He smiled faintly. You taught us that love outlasts pride, and that forgiveness, that's the only inheritance worth having. The wind stirred the leaves, almost as if in reply. And in that quiet moment, Daniel closed his eyes and felt a peace he hadn't known since he was a boy. Inside the house, Claire and Michael were setting the table once more. The smell of roast chicken filled the air. Laughter echoed down the halls, warm and familiar. A family, once broken, now whole again, sitting together not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And though I was gone, I was there in every smile, every shared story, every gentle touch that said, "We remember." Because in the end, it was never about the money. It was about the love that money could never buy, the kind that binds souls across time, even after the last breath has been taken. A lifetime of effort, mistakes, forgiveness, and love had led to this. The family I had dreamed of, finally together. And somewhere beyond the stars, I smiled.